Hello, my name is Tola Collier. I'm a military historian, and I'm going to be talking to you about Selton Hill in the national context in 1921. And in that context, Selton Hill actually takes place in the first part of 1921 at a time when the war is at its most ferocious and its most violent, and when nobody would have believed that by the summer of 1921 that there would have been a truce. So in this first part of 1921, actually on the day that the ambush takes place, Dáil Éireann in Dublin officially declares war on the British state, even though the Irish War of Independence had been raging since Solo Head Beg in 1919. So the Selton Hill ambush takes place at a time when the IRA are fighting hard, especially in Munster, in the south of the country, and also in Dublin. But the war is also expanding. Now, in the south of the country, the IRA have dealt the Crown forces some really heavy blows, in particular, most famously at ambushes like Kilmichael. And in Dublin as well, IRA General Headquarters and the Dublin Brigade have dealt a very, very heavy blow on Bloody Sunday to the British intelligence network in Ireland. The Crown's reaction to those events has undermined the support for the British Crown, not only in Ireland, but internationally as well, in particular when word of the massacres in Dublin is brought out to a wider audience by the international press. But also it's important to remember that the Crown were mounting official reprisals in places like Trim and County Meath and in Balbriggan most seriously, and then also in Cork. So with the burning of Cork, that's brought the British establishment into a degree of disrepute. Now, from a military perspective, the Crown are fighting back. They've introduced new forces to Ireland, and the primary force that they have, they don't want to admit that the war in Ireland is a war, is the Royal Irish Constabulary. Now, the Royal Irish Constabulary were set up in 1836, and their main mission is to uphold the Act of Union. They've been subjected to a very successful campaign of civil boycott, which has ostracized them. And now they've come under increasingly heavy attack since 1916 at the Battle of Ashburn. And then throughout 1918 and 1919, they've been ostracized and isolated in local communities. The IRA have attacked their barracks, and the RIC have been forced to withdraw from the barracks to larger fortified towns. To make up for the loss in numbers, because men have been retiring and leaving, the British have brought in ex-soldiers, and they're the Black and Tans. Now, they're ordinary soldiers who are brought in to replace the RIC. In the case of Selton Hill, and in the case of Leitrim, it is Adric, the auxiliary division of the Royal Irish Constabulary, which are part of the story we're talking about. It's a sort of a dubious honour for a county to have a section of the Auxies sent there. It means that the county is considered to be disturbed, it's up in arms, it's opposing the Crown. So the Adric who are sent there to be based in Mohill are being sent to suppress the people. Now, the Adric are considered an elite, they're uniformed and they're heavily armed. But it's important to remember that all of the Crown forces, whether they're described as police or military, are very heavily armed. The other part of the story of Selton Hill is the British military. Now, in 1920, the British military are increasingly becoming a part of what we would now call counterinsurgency war in Ireland. And in the case of Selton Hill, it is the Herefordshire and Bedfordshire Regiment which is being used. They're a regular British Army regiment. They've been formed back in the 16th, 17th century. They've taken part in the First World War. They've been reorganized, and they're forming two battalions. Number 1 battalion is sent to Ireland in 1920, and the other is sent to India. And in this, you see that the IRA are succeeding in putting pressure, and they are stretching Britain's military capabilities. So the 1st Battalion, Bedfordshire and Herefordshire Regiment, arrive in Ireland, and they get their first taste of guerrilla warfare in the Sheemore ambush, and they come out of that very badly. The IRA inflict a major defeat, a major ambush on them. They lose men, and you can clearly see they are out for revenge with Selton Hill. Now, Britain and the forces they use, as I would describe it, they're a study in two things. First of all, they're a study in an intelligence-led counterinsurgency, and secondly, they're a study in firepower. And in a moment, we'll go through some slides which describe how the British and the Crown forces, as they're normally described, have all the advantages. All of them, the Adric and the British Army, they are mobile in armoured tenders. And we'll see here in a moment the slide of the armoured tender. The other thing they have is superior firepower. Now, part of that firepower at Selton Hill is the Lewis light machine gun. Now, the Lewis light machine gun fires the same caliber of bullet as the Lee Enfield rifle, and that's some of those bullets here. It's a 303 bullet. It's a high velocity, high powered bullet. It has a range in excess of 1,000 to 3,000 yards. The Lewis gun can fire 550 rounds a minute, and it fires it from a 47 round drum magazine on top. And you'll see in a moment the illustration of the British soldier as he would have been on the day. But also it's important to remember that the IRA have captured, and you can see an IRA man in that slide, a modern representation using the Lewis light machine gun. So that's the example of the firepower. Now, the regular British Army are very well trained, and they're also very well equipped. So what the IRA are doing in 1921 is, particularly men like Richard Mulcahy in General Headquarters, they want to expand the war. They've come up with a form of warfare which is like modern asymmetrical warfare. They're using the enemy's strength against them, and they're maximizing their potential. So men like Shaw and Connolly are sent out into the countryside to link up with the local brigades. Other examples of an IRA organizer being Ernie O'Malley. So Connolly and O'Malley are moving around the country. They're training new forms of weapons operation, new forms of fighting, and they're expanding this new form of warfare. For IRA General Headquarters in Dublin, they know that the logistical situation is not very good. As they are fighting, they are using up their ammunition and their weapons are being captured. Everything that comes into Ireland in 1921 has to come in by sea, or it has to be captured from the Crown forces. That's why they're attacking RIC barracks. That's why they're engaging in attacks on the British Army. For a guerrilla in 1921, for a freedom fighter, the thing that they know is they must not only win the battle that they're taking part in at the time, they've got to capture the arms and the ammunition to fight the next battle. So while the British have the advantages of a developed logistics system, the IRA do not. Now, just to go through some of the weaponry that would have been used. Looking at the statue, the excellent statue of Selton Hill, this is the 303 rifle. It's a Lee Enfield rifle. It's a 10-shot magazine-fed rifle. The bullets go in here. They're loaded in over the top into the breech. A well-trained soldier can load and fire basically 30 to 40 rounds a minute, and the British are very well trained. The IRA, who do have many operatives who have been trained as British soldiers, are also well trained and they're good at using their weapons. But as we'll see at Selton Hill, in addition to the Lewis gun, it's the rifle, the Lee Enfield, which also does an awful lot of the damage. So we can go through that. Now, in addition to rifles, one of the things that's not often known about the Irish War of Independence is that handguns were commonly available, more readily available than long arms like the rifle and like the machine gun. This is an example of a Webley Mark III revolver. It would have been available from around about the 1880s, 1890s. It would have been carried by the Royal Irish Constabulary. It would have been available also to people who had sufficient money to buy it at the time. It was only with the Restoration of Order in Ireland Act and with DORA, which was the Defence of the Realm Act in 1914, that moves were made by the Crown to limit the amount of the amount of handguns which were available in Ireland. And then you would have had seizures of weaponry, and also laws would have been brought in forcing people to surrender their arms so that the IRA could not capture them. So there's an awful lot of descriptions in the records of the IRA raiding for arms. So that would have been one primary weapon. Later on in what we're talking about, you'll hear as well that the Leitrim, South Leitrim Brigade take the war to the enemy, to the Adric. This is an automatic pistol. It's a C96 Mauser pistol, and in many cases in the Irish War of Independence, when you're talking about automatic pistols, this is the weapon that would have been used. It's a 7.65mm high velocity pistol. A lot of them were very popular, not only with the IRA men, but also with Cumnaman women, the likes of Countess Markovitz and that type of thing in 1916. The useful thing about it is it can be used as a pistol, and it can also be used as a carbine, so you can aim it more readily and more effectively. Also, the other weapon that would have been used would have been the parabellum pistol, which a lot of you will be familiar as the Luger, but always it's referred to in Ireland as the parabellum. It's a 9mm handgun. It's a more powerful round of ammunition than the 7.63. It is slower moving, so it's more impactful when it hits a target. Fires from an 8-round magazine. Now, in addition to handguns, and this is something very particular to the ambush, what Sean Connolly is teaching the South Leitrim Brigade about is grenades. And this is an Irish-made grenade. It's a General Headquarters number 9. It would have been manufactured, this part of it here, which is a firing set, would have been produced in Dublin, in what is now Parnell Street, and then that would have been sent out into the country to the brigades. The local brigades would then, using blacksmiths and other technicians, make up the grenade bodies for them. During the action, during the ambush in Selton Hill, you'll remember that John Joe O'Reilly is trying to throw a grenade at the Crown forces when it explodes in his hand. And that means he's been shot, he's let go of the grenade, and the safety spoon or safety trigger flies off and the grenade explodes. Prior to that, this is the type of grenade that would have been used. It's known as a jam tin bomb, filled with gelignite, loaded up with scrap iron, and then you would light the fuse and throw it at the enemy. Or if you were more fortunate, and lastly, you have the British Army's Mills bomb. The Mills bomb was actually developed by a Belgian, used in the First World War, and it would have been used extensively in Ireland. It was the IRA grenade, the number 9, was actually based on a hybrid of the Mills bomb and a German grenade called an egg grenade. So, moving on, in Selton Hill, Sean Connolly is sent by Michael Collins to Roscommon and Leitrim, and he's told to train and improve the local brigade to get them into the war. The IRA General Headquarters want this to happen to take off pressure elsewhere and to expand the war. So it's said that Michael Collins tells Sean Connolly that he's going into a very dangerous situation where he's likely to be discovered. He arrives in South Leitrim and he goes to where a camp would normally be established. It's an area that's secure and friendly to the IRA. So he might have been told he's going to a treacherous county, but he knows he can rely on the area where the training camp is. The camp itself is fairly typical. It's set up in a house where there's a secure location where they can carry out their training undercover. But what they don't know is that a local man, a former British Army doctor knows where the camp is and has passed on that information to RIC District Inspector Hickman. Now, Hickman would have been delighted, because what Hickman has, he has actionable intelligence. Intelligence or information from someone he knows to be reliable, so he can move on that almost immediately. And what Hickman does is he gets on the phone, he phones up his counterpart in Boyle in the Herefordshire and Bedfordshire Regiment, and they organise a snap movement of troops. So 25 troops in armoured tenders with 2 officers move out. The reason the regular army and 1st Battalion are so keen to get into this action is because of Sheemore, because they've suffered a major defeat a week earlier before this. So they're out for blood. They move into position. They're accompanied by regular RIC and by Adric. 2 sections of the army set up positions with the Lewis light machine guns covering the house. 2 more sections move in. One goes to outflank the house, and another moves directly in to engage the IRA. They are spotted by a local school teacher, Charles Flynn, but his warning comes too late. The Crown forces open fire, and the safe house is literally met with a sheet of 303 machine gun bullets. Connolly is a wonderful commander. He reacts very quickly. The South Leitrim men who he's training are obviously very good at their job. They follow his orders. Connolly sets up a rear guard to secure the building, and then he tries to get his men out. Unfortunately, the British troops have moved up, and he's caught between 2 sections. The British soldiers are very well trained. They can fire and aim their Lee Enfield rifles at the same time, and they lay down accurate fire, and that's what does the damage. Connolly and the others are hit, and the cohesion of the unit begins to go down. However, as I said earlier, one of them, John Joe O'Reilly, tries to attack the Crown forces with a grenade. This would have come as a real surprise to the Crown forces. It shows the Leitrim Brigade have been receiving training, and they're a very major threat. So a running battle ensues, and I'll leave it to my colleagues, the other historians, to describe that in more detail. But the information we have comes from the one man, Mr. Sweeney, who survives the battle, and he gives very good information on what happens there. So the engagement is over, and it's an example of how the Crown forces have the firepower and the mobility to win a battle. But what we'll now see is they are losing the struggle for the hearts and minds of the Irish people. They carry on, they try to suppress the area, and they actually blow up a house, destroy a house belonging to a local man, Jack Hunt. Now, this is typical of the reprisals which are sanctioned after raids. We also have information from Ernie O'Malley, who says that the regular British Army, the Bedfordshire and Herefordshire troops, use rifle butts on the injured men on the ground. So they're very much moving away from what we would have seen earlier in the Irish War of Independence, when there was, if you look at the record, a grudging respect between what were known as the ordinary Tommies and the IRA men, the Irish volunteers. So the situation has come to a head. Now the South Leitrim Brigade need to recover, and they recover superbly well. South Leitrim organise a counterintelligence operation. They find out where the information had come from, and they set out to eliminate that leak. And this is going into the territory described in a lot of the records of the time and the history books now, where the IRA would use terms like spies beware. The one thing that can very much damage an insurgent and asymmetrical war is information. So the South Leitrim Brigade set out to stop that, but they also set out to send a very clear message, using limited resources, which they have, that South Leitrim is still in the war, and South Leitrim is going to continue to be in the war. We can see this because they find out that Dr. Pentland has left, but they do get the location of Mr. William Latimer. Now, Latimer could have been eliminated quite simply at close quarters by a volunteer with a revolver. But we know that they're setting out to send a message because the men who are sent after him are sent out with a very precious resource, with their 303 rifle. So 2 rifle-armed volunteers are sent to get 1 man, and that's done to send out a message: spies beware. They're also sent out with another weapon, which is the general headquarters grenade. So they go to Latimer's house. It's said that he shoots at them, and then they use the grenade to force him out of the house. They take him 300 yards from his house and he is executed. He's been tried in absentia, and the sentence for treason by a Republican court for something like that could have only been death by execution. Now, also, in addition to stopping the intelligence leak, the South Leitrim flying column go after the Adric. There is an Adric who is based in Drumshanbo. It's said that he was seeing a local girl, and they send out the officer commanding the local flying column. Now, he would have been equipped possibly with a weapon like this. It's said that he used an automatic pistol. In this particular instance, it's a 45 caliber 1911 American pistol, or it could have been a 9mm Browning pistol. The engagement happens on a country road. We know that the Adric is hit, and it's said in some records that he's killed, but we don't have other sources which confirm that he was killed. So now the South Leitrim Brigade are still in the war. They have rectified the intelligence leak and they're carrying on. What can we take from a situation like Selton Hill? It's very important. We see in Selton Hill in 1921 that the war is expanding, that the IRA are sending out their organisers, and that more local brigades and more flying columns are coming on stream. We can see from the presence of Adric, and we can see from the actions which take place before and after Selton Hill, that Leitrim, North and South, and Roscommon and Longford are areas that are very much in the war. They continue to be in the war, and it's a tribute to the people of Leitrim that they continue, even with the suppression that they're under, to support the local IRA. We know this because they rescue the man who's the survivor after the Selton Hill ambush, and after they help the local volunteers to locate the intelligence assets, Latimer and Pentland. For the Crown forces, it's a prime example of how firepower can be decisive, but not strategically so. By the actions that the Crown carry out in South Leitrim and elsewhere, they are winning battles, but they're losing the hearts and minds of the people. And in a final graphic that we'll put up, we'll just show some evidence of that. You can see between 1919 and 1921, the number of reprisals and outrages that are carried out by the Adric, the RIC, and also by the British Army. Towns destroyed, burned, creameries destroyed, damage done, that type of thing. All the time they're fighting against calling the war in Ireland a war. They're actually turning it into an extremely war-damaged country. The success for the South Leitrim Brigade, the success for the Irish Republican Army of the time, is that Leitrim and other areas which have flying columns, the flying columns survive up to the truce in 1921, when both sides are forced to admit that it's better to negotiate out of this situation than to continue to fight, because they can only exhaust each other. And in the final graphic, we'll see that in July of 1921, operating in Leitrim are not one but two flying columns, which is a very great tribute to the men and women of the time for enabling that to happen. One final thing I'll say is that Selton Hill is not unique in itself. It's a great example of the Irish War of Independence. But in May, another operation takes place in Cavan, very, very similar, in which a camp is attacked, one volunteer is killed, and equipment is captured. So I'd just like to thank you very much for your time. I'm Tola Collier. I'm a military historian. Sorry that I couldn't see you today because of the terrible thing with COVID-19, but I look forward to seeing you next year when we will bring down more great history and living history for you. So thank you very much.